Hey guys, really excited to be back and to continue this discussion about panarchy or panarchism. I talked about this a bit in my last video. I've also written about it. It's just this idea of non-territorial exit in terms of the governance structures that we live under, right? So it's about being able to choose a governance service or model without having to physically relocate, i.e. the philosophy of non-territorial exit. So panarchy in this sense can be considered a meta-political theory in accordance with scholar Avizer Tucker's idea of panarchy. Now there has been one concern that's come up on my Facebook feed in discussions with individuals. They think that advocating for panarchy and advocating that people should be able to opt in or to choose their own governance structure is not really based on consent, because they believe that governance is still government. So there is not a clear distinction for a lot of people between governance and government. They think governance is just another form of coerced implementation of some social standard or some social more or some social ideal. The reality is that there's a difference between government and governance. Now let's make that distinction clear. Government, in accordance with the Austrian school definition, or what we can call the Rothbardian definition, is just a group of individuals who have a monopoly on legitimate, quote-unquote, legitimate use of force over a large territorial region. So government is the monopolization of force that is often buttressed by the idea of coercion. Governance, on the other hand, denotes the management or the direction of some type of system or social environment. Now the key here is that governance certainly could be coerced, right? In the context of government, the governance there is coerced, but governance does not automatically denote coercion or enforcement. We can see governance as an opt-in service that governs a particular region or territory. So it's purely voluntary and consensual. And this idea is really underscored by how we've been using the idea of governance in modern nomenclature, modern parlance. And this is the idea of technological governance, right? Like the governance of Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin network, to use cryptocurrency as an example, is an opt-in form of governance. So the decisions that get made on the Bitcoin network are only formed through the democratized process of consensus, right? So that is how, or that is the best example of governance if we think about it from the perspective of technological innovation. Now what we're saying as panarchists is that these same kind of technological governance models can be applied to society, right? And the thing about the people involved in Bitcoin, right, the community, the miners, the users, the coders and developers, all those folks are widely distributed or decentralized, right? They live everywhere in the world, but they're still contributing to the governance of Bitcoin. So the question is this: why can't we leverage governance models in society at large? We should have the ability to choose where we want to live and what system of governance we want to live under, whether that is full monarchical rule, dictatorial or autocratic rule, or something more akin to libertarian anarchism, or some form of voluntarism, right? We should be able to choose what type of governance service or non-governance service we live under. So that's really the underlying thesis of panarchism. Panarchism is the cosmopolitan distribution of governance services, right? So we want to be very clear when we talk about governance versus government, and this is the truth of those differences. And that's really what we're offering as panarchists. We're saying you should be able to choose what type of governance model that you live under. Now some people, and I'll just talk about this briefly because this is just a clarification video, some people wonder, well, how would that actually work, right? If you go and leverage a governance model Are you just getting all the same quote unquote services as a government? And I would contend that the answer to that question is it really depends. I think what happens in a panarchist model is what Trent MacDonald called an unbundling of governance services, or that author Jerry Everhard called a disaggregation of state services. So what this means is that different elements of what the state quote unquote offers as a service, which are really just coerced and enforced on the population, would be things like personal defense, security, policing, different forms of insurance, and a number of other services, quote unquote, that come typically as part of a government monopoly. But now these different services would be disaggregated, and different types of panarchical governance services or governance solutions would offer these as part of their repertoire of solutions, right? So this is how governance would likely work in an environment of panarchical interaction. Now, I will add another point to this that's practical or pragmatic. This isn't just pie in the sky bloviating, right? There's already different experiments in terms of governance models, although they may not be panarchical. We can look to Prospera, right? Prospera as an example, or other special economic zones where people are developing different cities or societies around novel governance implementations, often closer to a libertarian mindset, although they may have different economic styles mixed in, like some form of socialism built into the context of that particular city. And that's the thing, that's the lovely thing. As a human species, we all have different prerogatives, we have different ideals, and we have different philosophies and different flavors of thought in regards to how things should function in society. So panarchy simply elevates that beautiful nature of humanity and says, hey, let's distribute all the differences in humankind in terms of how they want to live among everyone, no matter where they live. So I'm really happy to say that this isn't a dream, it isn't a fantasy. We're beginning to experiment with this right now. And as Balaji has also pointed out in his book, The Network State, we're attempting to do this right now, even within the context of nation states. I mean, technically, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a number of other cryptocurrencies are operating within the context of the nation state as alternative governance models. So an element of panarchy actually exists right now in the notion of cryptocurrency, which is a parallel or a parallelized financial system. So that's really all I have for today, guys. But do remember that there is a very clear distinction and difference between governance and government. Cool. Let's chat again soon. Cheers.